You're standing on a battlefield in Mesopotamia. To your left, a single M1A2 Abrams tank. Steel hull, composite armor, a turbine engine producing 1,500 horsepower. To your right, 50,000 Macedonian soldiers. The army that conquered the Persian Empire without losing a single major battle, the phalanx that never broke, the cavalry that changed warfare forever. This matchup sounds insane, because it is. But here's what makes it interesting. It's not obviously one-sided if you actually think about it. The tank is 68 metric tons of advanced metallurgy and engineering that wouldn't be invented for another 2,300 years. But 50,000 soldiers is also not something to dismiss. These aren't peasants with spears. These are the most professional warriors in the ancient world, led by a man many historians argue was the greatest military genius who ever lived. I spent way too much time researching this scenario, and honestly, the answer depends on how you frame the question. Before we dive into this, kindly subscribe and drop below who you think is winning. Don't overthink it. Choose your gut instinct right now. Now let's actually dissect why this is more complicated than most people think. Let's start with what the tank actually is, because most people think about guns and armor and miss the bigger picture. The M1A2 Abrams isn't just a gun with wheels, it's a complete weapons system. The armor alone is a masterpiece of material science. The hull uses multi-layered chobome composite construction with depleted uranium projectile cores. Against a standard kinetic penetrator, that frontal armor provides protection equivalent to roughly 400 millimeters of solid steel. Against shaped charge warheads, which is relevant because some ancient siege weapons work on shaped charge principles that number doubles to nearly 800 millimeters equivalent protection. A Macedonian warrior with a sarissa pike can generate about 80 to 110 joules of force when thrusting with maximum strength. The M1A2 is designed to withstand impacts, delivering multiple millions of joules. The gap isn't a factor of 10, it's not even a factor of 100. It's approximately 30,000 to 1. Let that sink in. 30,000 to 1. The cannon is a 120 millimeters. It fires multiple ammunition types, but the M1028 canister round matters most here. This single round contains approximately 1,100 tungsten pellets scattered in a shotgun pattern. When fired at the phalanx from 700 meters, which is well beyond any ancient ranged weapon's effective distance, those pellets spread across the front ranks like a scythe through wheat. Conservative estimates suggest each canister round kills 50 to 100 soldiers standing in formation. The tank carries 42 main gun rounds total. Do the math on maximum kill potential from the cannon alone. 42 rounds times 75 average casualties equals roughly 3,150 soldiers killed before the gunner even needs to reload from external ammunition sources. But the cannon isn't even the primary threat. Secondary weapons include one M240 coaxial machine gun capable of 500 to 750 rounds per minute, at a .50 caliber mounted machine gun with potential 600 round per minute cyclic rate. Combined, we're looking at roughly 1,500 rounds per minute of machine gun fire, each round traveling at 900 meters per second. Each round capable of penetrating ancient bronze armor and killing instantly. That's 1,500 potential casualties per minute from just secondary weapons firing continuously. The gunner doesn't shoot at individual soldiers. The gunner shoots at groups, at clusters, at formations. A 50-meter-wide burst of machine gun fire doesn't miss in a tightly packed phalanx. It hits everything. Here's where it gets stranger. The tank sees in complete darkness. Thermal imaging detects human body heat signatures through smoke, dust, fog, and absolute darkness at ranges exceeding 3,000 meters. A Macedonian soldier, even the best archer, sees maybe 80 meters in daylight. At night, they see nothing. The range advantage is 37 to 1 in daylight. In darkness, it's infinite. A Macedonian javelin, hurled by the strongest warrior ever trained, might travel 80 to 100 meters. The tank fires from 3,000 meters. That's a 30 to 1 distance advantage, just from the primary weapon. No ancient siege weapon, and Alexander had hundreds of them, can reach the tank from a distance where the tank cannot hit them first. And here's the crucial part. Nothing the ancient army possesses can damage the M1A2. Not a pike, not an arrow, not even a 100-pound stone catapulted with mechanical precision. Nothing. The armor shrugs off everything. The tank is functionally invulnerable to every weapon an ancient army can field. But dismissing Alexander's army as just guys with pointy sticks is a catastrophic mistake. This wasn't a mob. This was the most advanced military organization the ancient world had ever produced. At Gaugamela, where Alexander defeated Darius III and the entire Persian Empire, he commanded roughly 50,000 soldiers. The corps was approximately 12,000 phalangia, not militia, not conscripts, professional soldiers who trained year-round since childhood. They carried sarissa spikes measuring 4.5 to 5.5 meters, fought in 16 ranks deep. Here's what makes the phalanx terrifying. The first 5 ranks all extended their pikes beyond the front of the formation, so an enemy faced not 1 or 2 weapons, but 5 layered walls of spear points. A cavalry charge into that. The horses died on the spears. An infantry assault. Soldiers died trying to reach the ranks before the pikes reached them. Philip II, Alexander's father, invented full-time professional soldiering. These phalangites trained constantly. Formation drill was burned into muscle memory. Holding position against cavalry charges that would make modern soldiers flee, routine. The companion cavalry numbered around 2,000 elite warriors. These weren't regular horsemen. They were the first shock cavalry in military history, trained since youth to fight in tight wedge formations while wielding the Zeiston Lanza, 9-foot spear designed specifically for mounted combat. When a companion cavalry wedge charged, it could break through formations that repelled infantry. Alexander personally led these charges, and he never lost. Supporting them were 3,000 Hypaspist elite heavy infantry, who operated as the phalanx's mobile guard. Another 1,800 Thessalian heavy cavalry provided additional striking power. 1,000 Agrianian light infantry with javelins offered flexibility. And critically, between 300 and 500 torsion catapults capable of flinging 100-pound stones with mechanical precision. This wasn't an army. This was a complete military system. Infantry, cavalry, ranged weapons, siege equipment, supply lines, engineering corps, everything coordinated. But what made Alexander dangerous went beyond equipment. He was a tactical genius who adapted to every situation he encountered. At Gaugamela, he deliberately widened the Persian line through maneuver, stretched it until a gap appeared, then personally led the companion cavalry through that gap directly at Darius. The entire Persian army collapsed when its emperor was killed by a 25-year-old king who shouldn't have been alive to do it. At the Hydaspes River against King Porus, Alexander faced war elephants, something his army had never encountered. Instead of frontal assault, he conducted a night crossing 17 miles upstream with 11,000 men. Flanked the enemy and won through positioning rather than strength. His engineers weren't just soldiers. They built the world. They constructed a kilometer-long causeway to reach the island city of Tyre. They engineered siege towers 50 meters tall. Those same engineers could build defensive obstacles, dig trenches, and channel an enemy toward terrain disadvantageous to the enemy's strengths. Alexander's tactical pattern was consistent. Observe capabilities, identify constraints, exploit weaknesses. He never fought on his enemy's terms. He forced them to fight on his. So what would Alexander observe about the tank? Speed is impressive, but 68 tons constrains where it can traverse. Mountains, rivers, dense forests. These become impassable obstacles for a machine that requires roads or flat terrain. Firepower at distance is undeniable, but the firing cycle creates windows. Load, fire, reposition. Between cycles, soldiers can move, can advance, can probe. Most critically, the tank is alone. One machine. For crew members, while Alexander commands 50,000 soldiers that can rotate, fresh fighters can replace exhausted ones. The tank crew cannot. The sun rises. The Macedonian army advances in perfect formation. The phalanx moves at a controlled pace, maintaining the 16-rank structure that makes it invincible. Cavalry scouts range ahead, reporting the strange metal shape sitting on the horizon. The tank commander sees them first through the thermal sight. At 3,500 meters, the entire formation appears as a cohesive heat signature. Thousands of bodies clustered together. The commander alerts the gunner. The gunner doesn't need complex calculations. Modern fire control systems handle that. Range to target, 3,500 meters. Wind speed, negligible. Target: stationary, mass formation. The ballistic computer calculates the firing solution in seconds. The gunner simply confirms and fires. The first M1A2 canister round launches 1,100 tungsten pellets traveling at 1,569 meters per second towards an army marching in formation. From the Macedonian perspective, this is incomprehensible. There's no warning, no visible enemy, no arrows, no siege, weapon, fire. Suddenly, the left flank of the advancing formation erupts into chaos. Soldiers who marched in perfect ranks moments before are scattered across 60 meters of ground. The sarissas they carried are splintered. Men scream. Others simply don't move anymore. The phalanx does what it's trained to do: maintain formation. The rear ranks surge forward to fill the gap. The commanders shout orders: keep advancing. Close distance. Use formation. This is the doctrine that's worked against every enemy for generations. The tank fires again. This time, the round impacts closer to the center. Another wave of casualties, maybe 80 soldiers this time. The phalanx is taking 150 casualties per minute, but it's still advancing, still maintaining structure, still moving forward on the assumption that closing distance will solve the problem. At 2,500 meters, the coaxial machine gun opens up. Machine gun fire is different than canister rounds. It's continuous, relentless, 500 to 750 rounds per minute, raking across the formation. These bullets penetrate ancient bronze armor like paper. They don't have the spectacular impact of canister rounds, but they're more efficient, more consistent, more cruel. Soldiers die without understanding why. A Macedonian soldier trained to fight at close range suddenly watches his neighbor fall to invisible fire. Panic spreads like wildfire through tightly packed ranks. The formation that made them invincible becomes their tomb. Too densely packed to retreat. Too exposed to advance. The companion cavalry sees opportunity. This is what they do. They charge at 30 miles per hour in tight wedge formation, trusting that speed and shock will break the enemy. It's worked against every enemy they've faced. Persians, Indians, enemies with elephants. The tank commander sees them coming and does something unexpected. The M1A2 doesn't have horses. It has a turbine engine. It moves at 45 miles per hour and simply drives away, maintaining distance while the machine gun continues firing. From the cavalry's perspective, it's like chasing a ghost. They close distance, but the metal beast stays ahead. They're exhausting horses in a pursuit that never closes. Meanwhile, their comrades behind are dying from fire they cannot see, cannot reach, cannot defend against. The companions break off the charge after 3 kilometers. The horses are exhausted. The soldiers are frustrated. The tank is undamaged. From this point, things deteriorate rapidly. The phalanx has lost maybe 3,000 soldiers in the first 30 minutes of engagement. That's 6% of the army. The survivors are confused. They've never faced an enemy they cannot reach, an enemy they cannot see clearly, an enemy that kills from distances where their own weapons are useless. Orders get confused as officers are killed alongside their soldiers. The disciplined formation collapses into something resembling a mob. Soldiers begin seeking cover that doesn't exist on open ground. Some attempt to retreat. Some attempt to advance. Some simply stand frozen, waiting for death they don't understand. By hour 2 of continuous engagement, the tank has fired approximately 25 of its 42 main gun rounds. Combined with machine gun fire, the total casualty count approaches 7,000 soldiers. The army has lost 14% of its strength. More critically, they've lost cohesion. The formation, their greatest advantages, shattered. But here's what's important. The tank isn't invincible in time. It's invincible in a single engagement, in a single afternoon. In a scenario where Alexander's army tries to fight a conventional battle, here's where the analysis becomes interesting. Because warfare isn't fought in single afternoons. The tank carries 42 main gun rounds. In an intensive engagement, firing every minute, that's 42 minutes of cannon fire, before falling completely silent. Even with generous casualty estimates, 3,150 maximum kills from the cannon before it's empty. Machine gun ammunition is more plentiful. The tank carries approximately 10,000 total rounds across all machine guns. But firing at 1,500 rounds per minute, a realistic sustained rate for focused suppression, that ammunition runs out in roughly 6 to 7 minutes. 7 minutes of focused fire, Then the machine guns fall silent. Together, sustained fire for roughly 45 to 50 minutes total before all weapon systems run dry. The tank becomes a mobile pillbox, excellent protection, but completely unable to harm anything. Fuel is the real limitation. The Abrams burns between 1.5 and 3 gallons per mile, depending on terrain and operational tempo. Starting the turbine costs 10 gallons. Idling the engine burns 10 to 15 gallons per hour. The tank carries roughly 505 gallons of fuel. At maximum consumption rates, that's maybe 20 to 22 hours of continuous operations before fuel reserves become critically low. 22 hours of combat. Then the turbine goes quiet. Crew endurance is even more restrictive. For men in a steel box experiencing constant noise, vibration, and stress, modern studies show combat effectiveness degrades significantly. After 18 to 24 hours of continuous operations, reaction times slow. Judgment becomes impaired. The crew becomes as much a liability as an asset. Now consider what Alexander observes. The machine never seeks water, never forages for food, never requires shelter, but it consumes fuel at a steady rate. An ancient army has logistics, water sources, supply wagons, villages that provide forage. The tank has none. When fuel runs out, it becomes a disabled 68-ton bunker. Alexander's engineers didn't just fight wars, they engineered them. They built a kilometer-long causeway to assault Tyre. They constructed siege towers taller than modern buildings. They understood terrain. They understood fortification. Those same engineers could dig trenches around the tank's position, could build obstacles that force it toward terrain where the 45-mile-per-hour speed advantage means nothing. What if the tank encounters a river it cannot ford? What if the engineers dig trenches too deep to traverse? What if light forces shadow it constantly, never offering mass targets for the cannon, falling back whenever it advances? This becomes a siege in reverse. The tank besieges an army it cannot destroy, while the army besieges a machine that must eventually run out of fuel. The Macedonian soldiers that survived the initial engagement don't scatter. They adapt. They've defeated every enemy they've faced through adaptation. War elephants? Adapted. Persian cavalry? Adapted. Superior numbers. Adapted. An invisible enemy that kills from distance. It's a different kind of adaptation, but Alexander's army has proven capable of learning on the battlefield. If we extend this scenario from one engagement to 1 week, the answer changes. If we extend it to 1 month, it changes again. The tank dominates in a single afternoon. But a longer campaign, that's where Alexander's genius becomes relevant again. That's where an army of 50,000 with engineers, logistics, and tactical adaptation might find a way. The outcome depends less on technology and more on time frame. Give the tank 1 engagement. Tank wins completely. Give Alexander time to observe, adapt, and exploit limitations. The answer becomes uncertain. And Alexander never lost a battle. Never? In his entire career. Not because he had the best soldiers, though he did. Not because he had the best equipment, though he did. But because he adapted better than anyone else, because he found what an enemy couldn't defend and attacked there. Against an enemy that can kill from 3,000 meters. An enemy that never exhausts. An enemy that kills while remaining invulnerable. That's the most difficult adaptation Alexander ever faced. But is it impossible? So what actually wins? In a single engagement, the tank absolutely dominates. No contest. Ancient weapons cannot penetrate the armor. The range advantage is overwhelming. Thermal sights mean darkness is irrelevant. The phalanx, the ancient army's greatest strength, becomes a liability in direct engagement. A single afternoon, the tank wins 100 times out of 100. But extend the scenario to a longer time frame where logistics matter, where terrain becomes a factor, where an army of 50,000 with centuries of tactical experience gets time to adapt and exploit limitations. The answer becomes murky. The tank isn't truly invincible. It's invincible in a specific scenario, an open field engagement where distance favors the attacker and ammunition never depletes. Real warfare isn't that clean. Here's what I actually think. The tank wins the battle, but might lose the campaign. It kills maybe 10,000 soldiers in the initial engagements. That's brutal. That's devastating. But civilians remain. And those soldiers are led by a man who has never faced a tactical problem he couldn't solve. Modern military technology would be completely incomprehensible to Alexander. A sergeant from a modern logistics operation could probably exploit ancient resources more effectively than history's greatest generals. But Alexander wasn't just intelligent. He was adaptable. He was patient when patience served him. He was aggressive when aggression served him. He studied military history. He learned from defeated enemies. The outcome depends on whether the tank can kill enough soldiers fast enough before its advantages run out. Against a conventional ancient army, yes. Against Alexander specifically, that's the one matchup where ancient adaptability might overcome modern firepower. The most interesting part of this scenario isn't who wins, it's how long it takes to find out, and how much damage a single tank can inflict before running out of fuel and ammunition. Subscribe if you want more scenarios that actually respect both sides instead of just declaring one side obviously superior. Next video. What if a single Special Forces soldier faced 500 samurai warriors in their peak? See you then.